Imagine a city older than Rome, older than Athens, that hums with the ghosts of mathematicians, astronomers and poets carved in stone. High in the mountains of southern Mexico, long before the word Mexico even existed, the Zapotecs built a civilization that mapped the stars, invented one of the first written languages in the Americas, and ruled from a city so symmetrical it could have been drawn by geometry itself. And yet, most of us have never heard their name. That's the twist, isn't it? We can name every pyramid in Egypt, but we forget the ones that whisper above the clouds of Oaxaca. We talk about Athens as the cradle of democracy, but the Zapotecs were holding council meetings centuries before Socrates had his first midlife crisis. Somewhere between history and amnesia, they got edited out of the story. So here's a fact to stop you mid-scroll. The Zapotecs were running organised urban centres around 500 BCE. About the same time Rome was still figuring out its plumbing. They built Monte Alban, a city literally carved out of a mountaintop, with terraces, plazas and observatories aligned to the sun and stars. It's as if they looked up at the cosmos and thought, let's match that symmetry. And here's the question that lingers in the smoke of their incense. How do whole civilizations vanish from collective memory when their stones still stand? Is it because they didn't write in an alphabet we can read? Or because they didn't conquer, only created? If you're into stories where the ruins are smarter than the conquerors, well, you're in the right place. Stick around. And hey, if you end up liking this trip through time, hit subscribe. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because it keeps this kind of quiet history alive. Let's rewind a few thousand years, back to the valleys of Oaxaca. The air smells of pine and clay. Villages cling to the hills like small prayers. At night the stars aren't background. They're blue fire, close enough to trace with a finger. The people who would become the Zapotecs lived here, watching the heavens and noticing patterns, when the rains came, when the maize should be planted, when the gods might be listening. From those patterns grew a calendar, a language, and a sense of order that would soon become a civilization. They called themselves Be'ina Zaa, the cloud people. Not as poetry, but as geography. Their world was literally in the clouds, thousands of feet above the coastal plains. To live here was to be half earth, half heaven. And in that altitude they built something that defied time. Monte Alban wasn't a city that grew naturally like most ancient towns. It was planned, deliberately, mathematically. The Zapotecs levelled an entire mountaintop to create a sacred platform, a kind of stage for human ceremony and cosmic drama. Imagine standing there 2,000 years ago, surrounded by plazas so wide they swallow sound, temples that gleam white under the sun, and staircases rising like frozen thunder. The layout of Monte Alban aligns almost perfectly with celestial events, the solstices, the zenith sun, the path of Venus. To the Zapotec mind, architecture wasn't separate from astronomy. It was a continuation of it. Their temples were calendars in stone. And then there were the carvings, hundreds of them, figures etched into slabs of limestone called danzante. For a long time archaeologists thought they were dancers, but a closer look revealed something darker. The figures are twisted, contorted, warriors, captives, perhaps even sacrifices. Their bodies are annotated with glyphs, names, maybe ranks, maybe stories. The first writing in Mesoamerica wasn't poetry or law, it was power. What's fascinating is that the Zapotecs built all of this without the usual empire blueprint. No armies sweeping across continents, no mythology of blood and glory. Their strength was subtler: trade, ritual, lineage, and the slow art of building permanence. They endured for more than 1,000 years, through droughts, migrations, and the rise of neighbours like the Mixtecs and Aztecs. And when they finally faded, it wasn't collapse so much as transformation. Their descendants are still there, speaking Zapotec languages, weaving stories in cloth instead of stone. That's the paradox of the Zapotecs, a civilization ancient enough to rival Egypt, yet alive enough to speak for itself, if we listen. And maybe that's why this story matters now, because the Zapotecs remind us that civilization isn't just about what you conquer. It's about what you create, what you remember, what you pass down when the empire is gone. So as we walk through their temples and tombs, listen closely. The wind in Monte Alban still sounds like a language we almost remember. So let's begin. The wind hits stone, and the stone remembers. At dawn in Oaxaca's valley, the light doesn't just rise, it climbs, golden and deliberate, tracing the outlines of hills that will one day hold a civilization. Before there were kings, before there were calendars, there were farmers watching shadows lengthen across the soil and realizing that time itself was measurable. That's how the Zapotec world began, not with thunder or conquest, but with the quiet audacity of observation. Imagine it. Mist clinging to the ridges, smoke from morning fires curling into the sky. The first villages, no more than clusters of adobe and thatch, wake to the rhythm of corn grinding and dogs barking. But somewhere in that daily noise someone looks up, not down, and notices that the stars move like clockwork, that the sun rises a little differently each season, that the gods, if they exist, must keep time. That's where wonder lives, in the gap between survival and curiosity. These were people who lived close to the bone of the earth, yet somehow managed to look beyond it. They studied the heavens with the same hands that planted maize, and maybe, in that dual act, of feeding the body and questioning the sky, they found the first pulse of civilization. They didn't call it progress, of course. Progress is our word for it. To them, it was harmony, a balancing act between what you could see and what you could never quite reach. And so, across the centuries, the villages grew teeth and temples. People began to gather not just to survive, but to synchronize, to mark when to plant, when to mourn, when to dance. Ritual became architecture, architecture became religion, and religion became everything. It's almost funny when you think about it. The Zapotecs invented calendars before weekends, which feels both impressive and tragic. But here's what's truly astonishing. Their first writing wasn't born from poetry or trade, but from the need to remember the sacred. Every glyph was a prayer carved into permanence. Their symbols spoke of rulers and ancestors, but also of storms and stars. In those shapes you can still feel the hum of a people trying to make meaning from chaos. As the centuries rolled on, their world began to gather momentum. The Zapotecs didn't wait for inspiration, they carved it. Around 500 BCE, they looked up at a mountain and decided it should be flat. That mountain became Monte Alban, a city in the clouds, planned with a precision that would make modern architects blush. Picture it rising from the fog, terraces glimmering like scales, plazas open as the sky, temples aligned so perfectly with the stars that even the wind feels deliberate. This wasn't just a city, it was a diagram of faith and mathematics. Every stone had logic, every shadow had purpose, and at the centre of it all, the people. Farmers turned masons, priests turned engineers. They moved millions of tons of rock without wheels, pulleys or steel. They used geometry, muscle and conviction. If you ever doubt what belief can build, stand at Monte Alban's main plaza. It's like walking through the skeleton of an idea made real. The city grew into a capital of order. From this mountaintop, the Zapotecs governed the valleys below, trading with distant peoples, crafting jade masks and gold ornaments, and carving tombs that shimmered with eternity. They measured time not by rains or wars, but by the slow, steady dance of Venus. But mountains have long memories, and perfection never sits still. Because here's the thing about harmony, it's fragile. It takes only one offbeat note to turn music into noise. The Zapotecs had built a society so precise that even their rituals depended on exact timing. When the rains came too late, when crops failed, when celestial alignments shifted ever so slightly, it wasn't just bad luck. It was cosmic dissonance. So they built temples higher, made offerings deeper, and yes, they sacrificed. The danzantes, the stone figures that twist and writhe, still whisper of that tension. Power demands proof. Order requires fear. The carvings may have begun as portraits of the fallen, but they became warnings in stone. Harmony has a price, and yet the contradiction is almost poetic. These were people obsessed with balance, who used violence to preserve peace, who worshipped the cycles of life by ritually interrupting them. Their civilization was both sanctuary and stage, sacred geometry and human flaw. From the outside, Monte Alban must have seemed immortal, but from within, you could probably feel the strain, the weight of keeping heaven and earth aligned by sheer will. Every society chasing perfection eventually learns that perfection doesn't negotiate. Maybe that's the universal rhythm of civilizations. We build to reach the sky, but the higher we climb, the thinner the air becomes. The Zapotecs were no exception. Their rulers claimed divine lineage, tracing bloodlines back to gods. Their priests read the stars, their artisans immortalized them in gold, and their farmers fed the entire dream. But even dreams have gravity. By the late Classic period, around 800 CE, the signs began to show. The plazas echoed emptier. Trade routes shifted. New powers rose, Mixtecs, Toltecs, later Aztecs, and the mountain that once commanded the valley started to feel a little smaller. Monte Alban's temples, once full of ritual, grew silent. But here's where the story resists tragedy. The Zapotecs didn't vanish. They adapted. Moved down from the heights into the fertile valleys, built new towns, new languages, new myths. Their civilization didn't collapse. It exhaled. It turned stone back into story. And maybe that's why Monte Alban still feels alive. The wind that sweeps through its courtyards isn't mourning. It's remembering. Because when you walk among those temples today, what you feel isn't ruin. It's residue. The ghost of logic, the scent of faith, the echo of footsteps from people who believed the universe had a pattern and that they could live inside it. It's hard not to see ourselves in them. We chase order too, through data, systems, even social media algorithms. We still build towers to touch the sky and still panic when they shake. The Zapotecs remind us that for all our progress, we're still the same animal looking up, trying to make sense of the stars. And maybe that's why their story matters, not as a history of conquest or loss, but as a mirror. They remind us that civilization isn't measured by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it tries to understand its place in the universe. So as we leave Monte Alban summit, let's pause at the edge where stone meets sky. The view stretches for miles, valleys, rivers, mountains fading into mist. It looks eternal, but it isn't. Nothing is. That's what makes it beautiful. Because in the rise of the Zapotecs, we see not just the dawn of a people, but the eternal risk of creation itself, the courage to build meaning from silence, to carve order from chaos, knowing full well it may one day crumble back into dust. And still, they built. That's the uneasy triumph, the wisdom and the warning, the clouds gathering just beyond the mountaintop, and from here, the story only deepens. It begins with stillness, the kind that feels earned, not given. The mountain sleeps. The temples glint in the afternoon sun. Below, the valleys hum with trade and laughter, and the sound of mortals who believe they've figured out how to live forever. This is Monte Alban at its height, a city so sure of its symmetry, it mistakes order for immortality. Priests chart the heavens, rulers speak to gods through smoke and jade, and farmers in the valleys obey calendars carved in stone. Everything fits. Everything shines. But perfection, as history keeps proving, is just tension wearing a crown. At first, the cracks are invisible. A dry season here, a misalignment there. The priests promise rain. The rain does not come, so they promise more sacrifices. The drought lingers. Faith begins to tremble, but quietly, behind closed doors. You can almost hear the doubt in the wind that drags across the plazas. The rulers, anxious to keep the divine contract intact, do what humans have always done when the gods go silent. They double down. More rituals, grander offerings, blood for balance. They carve new temples higher, as if elevation could repair devotion. And when prayers stop working, they look sideways, toward their neighbours. The valleys around Oaxaca are not empty. Other cities rise. Rivals who once traded maize and obsidian now whisper of rebellion. The Mixtecs to the north. The peoples of the Isthmus to the south. Each with their own gods, their own ambitions. The Zapotecs, once content to build, begin to defend. They fortify their mountaintop. They send armies down into the valleys they once ruled by persuasion. And so, a civilization born of balance turns to war. They prayed for peace, but built better weapons. Stone-tipped spears, obsidian blades sharper than glass. Shields painted with symbols of rain and fire. It's almost poetic. fighting in the name of the elements they no longer control. In one tomb, archaeologists found murals of a treaty drawn in smoke and blood. 2 rulers, hands extended, eyes wary. Diplomacy, 500 CE edition. The ink may have been soot and wine, the signatures, fingerprints pressed in crimson. It was peace, but only long enough for both sides to sharpen their knives. The Zapotecs learned conquest late and awkwardly. Their wars were as much theatre as strategy, ceremonial battle staged to affirm cosmic order. But when theatre turns real, it doesn't end with applause. As rival states pushed back, Monte Alban's influence began to contract. Armies that once marched outward now guarded the slopes below their sacred mountain. The empire that never called itself one was shrinking, and its priests could only interpret decline as divine judgment. Faith, once a compass, becomes a courtroom. Every drought, every defeat is someone's sin. The leaders respond with purity campaigns, inventing new rituals to cleanse what they cannot fix. You can imagine the exhaustion of it, the endless ceremonies, the smoke, the chants, trying to hold a city together with incense and ideology. And beneath that smoke, people whisper about the arrogance of the rulers, about the gods who take and never give, about the mountain that was supposed to protect them but now feels like a cage. Some leave quietly down the slopes, toward the river valleys where new cities promise fertile soil and looser rules. Others stay, bound by blood or fear or faith. Monte Alban empties not through fire, but through forgetting. But before that silence comes the crescendo. There are records, glyphs on stone, of a great campaign, a desperate attempt to reclaim lost power, armies marching under banners of a lightning, seeking tribute, seeking purpose. They descend into the valleys, battles rage for years, and then one day the fighting simply stops. No decisive victory, no dramatic fall, just exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bones, into generations. You can almost hear the silence between battles, the hush after ambition breaks its own spine. When the soldiers return, Monte Alban is different. The temples still stand, but the priest's words sound hollow. The stars still move, but no one writes down what they mean. The city becomes a monument to its own past. The irony is exquisite. They built a city to outlast them, and it does. The stone survives, the people fade. They wanted to live forever. Instead, they left perfect ruins. And yet, there's something deeply human about that failure. They weren't fools or villains. They were dreamers who mistook precision for permanence, who believed that if they aligned their temples with the heavens might notice. The fall of Monte Alban isn't a single moment. It's a slow unweaving. The Mixtecs move in, repurposing temples for their own gods. Old Zapotec tombs are reopened, painted over, reused. Even their dead are recycled into someone else's eternity. It's not desecration, it's evolution. Civilization as palimpsest. By 900 CE, Monte Alban is a ghost of itself. Stone bones under the sun. But below, in the valleys, Zapotec life continues. They adapt, trade, intermarry. Their languages diverge, their myths evolve. The gods don't die, they change names. And that's the quiet miracle inside the tragedy. The civilization collapses, but the culture doesn't. You can still hear Zapotec spoken today. Different dialects, yes, but the same heartbeat. Farmers still watch the sky for rain. Artisans still weave patterns older than Rome. The people of the clouds came down to earth, but they never vanished. When archaeologists first climbed Monte Alban in the 19th century, they expected death and decay. What they found instead was precision. The city's layout still matched the stars. The stones still faced the solstice sun. Even abandoned, the Zapotecs' idea of order endured. Maybe that's the final irony. They tried to bind heaven to earth, and in doing so, built something the gods themselves couldn't erase. Because every civilization ends the same way, not with apocalypse, but with adaptation. The grandeur fades, the meaning shifts, and what remains are stories. Some carved in stone, others whispered in kitchens, sung at weddings, painted in the corners of churches. The Zapotecs may have lost their mountain, their empire, their name in our history books, but not their presence. They are still there, in the language, in the rhythm of village life, in the faces of those who call Oaxaca home. Survival isn't always visible. Sometimes it's quiet. So as the sun sets over Monte Alban, the plazas glow gold one last time. The air is still. The wind carries a sound that might be memory, might be myth. Civilizations rise for meaning. They fall for the same reason. And yet, somehow, the meaning remains. The storm has passed. The mountain breathes again. And in that breath, something endures. Morning finds the mountain again. The air is thinner, gentler now. The light pools between the stones, and for a moment, Monte Alban looks less like a ruin and more like a memory deciding to stay. The storm has passed. The gods are quiet. But time is still speaking. Not in thunder or prophecy, but in the rustle of grass between the steps, the call of birds nesting where priests once prayed. Nature has reclaimed her rent, and in doing so, given the place a kind of peace no empire ever could. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear it. Not silence, but continuity. The heartbeat of something that refused to end. Because the Zapotec world didn't disappear. It dissolved, like salt in water, spreading everywhere. You can see it in the way Oaxacan villages still honour the dead with candles and marigolds. Not as mourning, but as conversation. Dia de los Muertos, that bright defiance of loss, isn't new. It's an echo of rituals the Zapotecs began more than 2,000 years ago, when they spoke to ancestors through food and firelight. The past, for them, was never gone, just waiting for someone to listen. And the architecture? That's a kind of language too. The way cities like Mitla blend geometry with spirit, every pattern whispering a prayer disguised as math. Those walls aren't painted, they're woven in stone, repeating motifs that once symbolized wind, earth, lightning. We call it design. They called it balance. Even the way we mark time owes them a quiet debt. Their calendar, intricate, cyclical, self-correcting, guided planting seasons and ceremonies with the precision of an atomic clock minus the atom. We like to think of ourselves as modern because our calendars live in our pockets, glowing on screens. But the Zapotecs carried theirs in their sky, their soil, their bones. They track the stars with stone. We lose sleep tracking blue light schedules. What survives isn't just invention, but instinct. The Zapotecs sense that everything, gods, humans, rain, maize, is part of one living conversation. That life isn't a straight line forward, but a spiral. You can feel that worldview pulsing even now in Oaxacan art, in the weaving patterns that never quite repeat, in the slow, deliberate patience of their rituals. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is final. It's humbling, isn't it? We chase innovation like it's a race, yet here was a civilization that built eternity out of rhythm and patience. They measured the universe by its return, not its speed. Maybe that's the genius we've forgotten. Not how to build higher, but how to endure gracefully. Still, even endurance has its humour. The Zapotecs invented bureaucracy before paper. They tracked tribute, lineage, and cosmic schedules using carved glyphs and memory. Imagine your entire civilization running on stone spreadsheets. We added PDFs and somehow made it worse. Their world was meticulous. Every ritual timed, every pattern meaningful, and yet profoundly human. They worshipped with a precision that occasionally bordered on obsession. We do the same, just with algorithms instead of deities. Maybe the gods never left. They just changed forms and moved online. And somewhere, in a village not far from Monte Alban, a child still speaks Zapotec, still grows up hearing stories of the spirits in the hills, still learns to offer food to those who came before. The lineage hasn't broken. It's just softer now, spoken in kitchens instead of temples, sung in lullabies instead of chants. That's the quiet miracle. Continuity without dominance. The Zapotecs' legacy isn't one of empire or conquest, but of persistence through humility. They didn't rule the world. They remained part of it. And somehow, that turned out to be the stronger spell. When you stand at Monte Alban today, the wind feels familiar. It moves the same way it must have moved over priests and builders, traders and dreamers. You realise time hasn't erased them. It's collaborating with them. Every ruin is just the earth rehearsing memory. We like to think history is about what's over, but maybe it's about what refuses to be. The Zapotecs show us that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the whisper that keeps going when the drums have stopped. Their genius wasn't in conquest, or even invention. It was in translation. They learned how to turn belief into structure, structure into meaning, and meaning back into life. They found eternity in repetition, beauty in precision, and peace in impermanence. That's not ancient wisdom. That's the blueprint of being human. So what remains? The language. Yes. The art. Yes. But more than that, a way of seeing. A reminder that the sacred doesn't live only in temples or texts, but in the symmetry between effort and wonder, between what we make and what we let go. As the sun climbs again over Monte Alban, the stones warm. The light catches the carvings, and for a heartbeat they almost look alive. The faces, the glyphs, the echoes of a people who once believed the universe could be mapped if you just looked carefully enough. Maybe they were right. Maybe that map was never meant to be drawn, only lived. History, after all, isn't a story we finish. It's a story we inherit. And here, on this mountain of memory and light, the inheritance still breathes, quiet, unbroken, eternal as dawn. And so we exhale. The climb is done, the wind has softened, and the mountain no longer feels like a monument, just earth, patient and alive. What remains isn't the grandeur or the tragedy, but the rhythm beneath both. The same pulse that built cities from dust and carved calendars from stars still beats quietly in us. We build, we believe, we lose, we rebuild, always reaching for meaning with hands that never quite stop shaking. The Zapotecs remind us that civilization isn't a finish line. It's a practice, a rehearsal for belonging. They built their world not to last forever, but to be part of forever, to leave something worth listening to when the voices were gone. And maybe that's all any of us ever do. We think progress is invention, but maybe it's memory with better lighting. Maybe we're just translating the same questions. How to live with each other, how to find order in chaos, how to make the silence sing. Their stones were aligned to the sun, ours are aligned to Wi-Fi. Different signals, same hunger for connection. They tracked Venus to know when to plant. We track notifications to know we exist. The methods change, but the longing doesn't. Maybe progress just means inventing new ways to miss the point and new chances to find it again. Still, there's comfort in that repetition, in knowing that even after empires fade, something human always stays behind. A word, a ritual, a melody hummed by someone who's never heard your name but somehow shares your wonder. When the light tilts across Monte Alban at dusk, it hits the carvings just so, and for a heartbeat time folds. The past and the present breathe together. You can almost imagine the cloud people still walking the terraces, still whispering to the stars, still teaching the wind how to remember. That's the gift they left us. Not immortality, but continuity. The promise that nothing meaningful ever truly disappears. It just changes form, waiting to be noticed again. And as the sun sinks behind the mountain, painting the valley gold, one truth lingers in the air like a benediction. Everything ends, but nothing is ever truly over.